Hey guys, welcome to today's episode, and I'm so excited. We have Brian Keene of Brian Keane Fitness here today. And today, if you are in a rut, this is the podcast for you. So, Brian, we constantly are getting people who are like, I've done intermittent fasting, I've lost 30 pounds, and they're like, I'm on my last 15 pounds or my last 10 pounds, and they just can't get that last 10 or 15 pounds. And they're just in a rut and they feel like they're doing everything right. Like I literally, when I tell you the number one question I get is like, I've lost all this weight. I feel like I'm eating organic. I'm eating in a 6-hour window. I'm doing this. I'm doing this. I'm working out. I'm walking. I'm doing all the things, but I can't lose that last 10 to 15 pounds. So let's start with that. How about that this morning?
Oh, I love it, Chantel. Yes, that is right in my wheelhouse in terms of questions that I love to answer because that's such a frustrating place for somebody to be because on the face of it, you're doing nearly all the right things. And the reason that you're able to lose the 20 pounds is that it worked. You found a strategy. The intermittent fasting was a great protocol, the 6-hour window, the organic food. There's tends to be three areas and pitfalls for people that hit that plateau and they can't push past it. One is they're not looking at the movement side. The second is they're not looking at the sleep and the hormonal balance side. And the third, I'll come back to at the end. With the movement side, the exercise side, which generally isn't what people want to hear, but I am going to explain it as to why it's so beneficial and why you can push past the plateau with this. With intermittent fasting, time restricted eating, good quality food, you're going to be able to lose those 20 pounds, but you will eventually get to a point where your body says, no, I'm done. We're going to hold here and we're going to stay here. That's when it's time to inject something different into your regimen. And something like strength training, which is so important for everybody, but particularly for someone who's at a weight loss plateau, when you're strength training, whether that's in the gym or at home with dumbbells or weights or your body weight and resistance training, that's what increases your metabolic rate. It's what actually boosts your metabolism. And what can happen sometimes when you lose 20 pounds is your metabolism can actually slow down as your weight goes down. That is very, very common with some people, especially if they've done it purely through diet, through nutrition, which is an amazing way and the best way to do it. But it does stop working after a certain point. So when you add in something like strength training or resistance training, you end up boosting your metabolism. And the analogy I give is when you strength train 3 days a week, 4 days a week in the gym at home, it's the metabolic fat burning equivalent of making money while you sleep because your body has to tear and repair from those workouts and your metabolic rate, your metabolism goes up. So you'll see things like teas and supplements that are claimed to boost metabolism, and some of them work, some of them don't. But scientifically backed, which is my area as a qualified personal trainer, is using the research to support and then working with clients and anecdotal and actual firsthand experience to see this is how it works. You're adding in that resistance training, you're boosting up your metabolism. So your body fat and your weight start to come down over time. So over a 6, 8, 10, 12-week period, you're able to push past that plateau by just adding in a resistance or a strength training program on top of all the stuff that's worked for you already. The second is your sleep. A lot of people find sometimes when they lose weight over a period of time, their sleep can get disrupted, or it can improve if they were morbidly obese to start with. You'll find an improvement in sleep over time as your weight comes down and you're able to have less sleep apnea, etc. So again, it depends on the starting point of the individual, but focusing on your sleep is what balances out a lot of hormones. So if you're struggling with things like ghrelin, leptin, or cortisol in particular, your ghrelin, leptin, hunger and satiation hormones, but your cortisol, your stress hormone, that can, because life is busy, this from running businesses and being in real estate and all that. Like, life is busy, you're going and you're getting things done and stress is high, and you might be someone listening and you've got small kids at home, or you're working around the clock, or you're in a stressful period of life for whatever reason. Having high quality sleep can help balance that and keep that hormone in check when it comes to cortisol and stress hormone. And then other things like exercise can improve that too. Cold exposure, cold showers, sauna, heat, etc. And then the final thing is your protein. So with intermittent fasting, with organic eating, two really good protocols for controlling weight and getting into a kind of a good place with your nutrition and your health in general. Sometimes protein can be too low. And you've got your three macronutrients, you've got your protein, you've got your carbohydrates, you've got your fat. Sometimes when people are intermittent fasting, if they're doing a 6 hour time restricted window, they can struggle to hit their daily protein requirements. And protein works in two ways for helping push past the fat loss plateau. One, it's a very highly satiating macronutrient, meaning that you can eat 100 grams of protein or 100 grams of carbohydrate. The calories are exactly the same. There's 4 kilocalories per gram of each, but you're going to be really full after 100 grams of protein because there's inbuilt satiation in that food. Whereas, if you do that with rice or sweet potato or a bag of chips, you're going to be able to keep eating more and more and more because they're highly palatable and they're less satiating with carbohydrates. So you want to look at your protein intake. So making sure that you're in that 6 hour window, you're hitting your daily protein requirements, that, 1 gram per pound of body weight. So if you're 100 pounds, you want to be hitting at least 100 grams of protein per day. Those three things tend to push people out of a plateau when they've done all the things right and they just can't get to the next level.
Okay, so I want to try to come up with 8 things. So number 1, we said adding more weight training. That's going to be number 1. Number 2 is making sure that you're getting enough sleep, and not only really just getting enough sleep. I think, like you said, is just that a lot of times, like I have an Aura ring. And, a lot of times I'll think, oh, I went to bed because I go to bed really early. I go to bed at like 8:30 at night. And then I will get up around 5:30. And then even with my Aura ring, you think you're maybe getting 8.5 hours of sleep. But when you look at the Aura ring, you see, okay, I'm actually not, because I got up in the middle of the night or I wasn't doing this or that. So I think tracking your sleep is definitely a good one. And then I think you said, what did you say is
Protein.
number
Protein was
3?
protein was number
Protein.
3. Yeah.
Yeah. So number 3 is protein. That's such a big one for me. Like I feel like I don't love so much protein, so I have to work hard at making sure I love the protein that I'm eating. So that's really good. And then number 4, I think we need, did you mention stress?
Stress is huge. Yeah. Stress. I tied it in with sleep, but it needs to be its own.
It needs to be its own. So number 1 is adding more weight training. Number 2 is sleep. Number 3 is getting enough protein. Number 4, is stress, because I think a lot of us don't realize that, cortisol is known as the stress hormone. And if you're producing too much cortisol, it can make weight loss very difficult. I mean, we've seen that through research. So really coming up with ways to manage stress is really good. And I also think a lot of people shouldn't, I'm going to say for the number 5, I think we're at, is don't rely on the scale alone, because I think what's happens as well is if you are doing all of that weight training, scale reading might not be accurately reflecting your progress. And so you might have like built a bunch of muscle, and so, rather than weight loss, your goal is actually fat loss. And so, if you're working out, building a bunch of a muscle, which is denser than fat, and it takes up less room in your body. So, I think just reminding yourself, hey, I've also built a bunch, just not relying on the scale alone, like looking at your body composition as well. Anything else that you think, if someone's in a rut, that you could add to our mix so we could come up with 8 of them? We're on number 5. 3 more things can you come up with?
Yes, and I'm going to add to that because that was so beautifully said, Chantel, that weight loss and fat loss are two different things. Weight loss is lowering numbers on a scale. Fat loss is reducing the amount of fat on your body. And things like resistance training, strength training means that your muscle might be going up, which is actually what you want to have happen. It's building that lean muscle tissue, because people think, oh, I don't want to get big and bulky. Muscle isn't big and bulky. Muscle is lean. It's big and bulky if it's got a lot of body fat around it. So you're looking to build a lean physique that keeps your metabolism high. And sometimes the weight on the scale might not drop because that muscle is going up. Or if you're eating a lot of carbohydrates, for every gram of carbohydrate you eat, you can pull in
Well,
between
that
4 and
needs to
7.
be another one. Cut
Mm.
back on carbs. That needs to definitely be our number 6, is cutting back on carbs, because I think that if you are in a rut, one of the things, yeah, we want to increase our protein, but some of the carbs and some of the bad carbs that we're eating, you might want to look at kind of cutting back on some of those that are not going to make your weight loss where you need to be. Do you
Yeah,
agree?
I agreed, because when you're in a weight loss phase and you've hit a plateau, you're going to be controlling for calories. So you want your body in some form of deficit. So you're tapping into that stored fat and using it for fuel. And the downside of being in a deficit with higher carbs, like I mentioned earlier, is it's very easy to overeat carbohydrates because there's no real inbuilt satiation in most carbohydrates. Although things like brown rice, oatmeal have higher fiber, they can keep you fuller for longer. Scaling back can be really helpful because it means you can increase either protein if you struggle to hit it, or dietary fat, especially if it's good fat from avocados, olive oil, etc. You're going to have a lot more hormonal balance, especially if you're female, and it's going to support that hormonal function, particularly depending on age, whether you're, even just at normal age with your menstrual cycle, but perimenopausal and menopausal women, you want to make sure that that dietary fat is high so that you're minimizing some of those negative effects as well. So it can help push you past that plateau for sure.
And I want to say, I'm going to add number 7 as changing up your eating window, because just like you want to change things up in the gym, so your body is shaken up, you want to do different things where you say, okay, today I might be eating in a 5-hour window. Tomorrow I might be in a 7-hour window. One day I might, do a longer one where I just eat one meal a day. And then the next day I might eat in an 8-hour window. But getting your body to where it's kind of changing things up, I think is definitely a way that you can kind of, it's just like the gym. Like if you're literally doing the same thing at the gym all the time, your body's like, we're doing this all the time. Like there's nothing new. So changing up, I think that eating window would be number 7. And then give us one last thing, Brian, so we can get to number 8 things, so we can simple ways to break through a weight loss plateau. What would be number 8?
I'll go with the sexiest for last because people love a good supplement to add in when it can support them on a goal. I think adding in a couple of supplements that will support fat loss and pushing past a fat loss plateau or weight loss plateau that won't have a negative impact. The 3: caffeine, green tea extract with a high level of ECGC, which is the compound that elevates your metabolism within that. So you have to look at the back of the food label and make sure that the ECGC compound is at 45% or higher to have a positive impact on metabolic health. Otherwise, it's just going to have a positive impact on overall health. You want it to speed up your metabolism. And then L-carnitine last, either acetyl L-carnitine, which is a bit more cognitive function but can support fat loss, or L-carnitine tartrate, which helps push fat cells into the mitochondria to be burned for fuel. They're 3 ones that I'm a big fan of that have a very low risk profile for people and that don't have a negative rebound when you stop taking them. For the most part, caffeine, again, depends on starting point.
I don't know about you guys, but I am stressed. And if you're feeling overwhelmed this holiday season, then I get it. With all the family get togethers, it is just a relentless source of stress. But anyway, there is something that I've got called Stress Guardian. And it's actually made by Bioptimizers, the people who make the magnesium breakthrough, which I love, love, love. But anyway, they are literally made this new product. It has 14 adaptogenic herbs and it just regulates your stress. I just actually took some right this second and it's awesome. If you go to stressguardian.com/wasteaway and put in waste away for 10% off your first order, it's stressguardian.com/wasteaway. Go there now.
The L-carnitine, I think, is so huge. I'm telling you right now, there's a brand. My husband swears by it. Okay. It's called Live On is the brand. It's called lipospheric L-carnitine. And it literally, like when we run out, he just is constantly like, we need this, we need this. But I think that L-carnitine makes a huge difference. I would say it when he in his mind anyway, he's like, it makes a 5-pound difference because we like ran out of it. And he was like, we need this. And he's like, I gained 5 pounds when I didn't have that L-carnitine. So I definitely think that L-carnitine makes a huge difference for sure. Do you agree?
Big fan. One of my favorite fat loss supplements of all time because it is a very low negative impact when people come off it. They might get a little bit of a weight increase, but it's not like one of those diet pills that you buy in GNC or that will suppress your appetite, which will increase your energy with a lot of stimulants, where when you come off it, you'll be drained physically, energetically, and your appetite will go through the roof. I would avoid those as much as possible, whereas like carnitine doesn't have any of those effects. So I'm a massive fan.
Yeah. And I would say there's one more thing. Um, there is something that I love. It's basically a thyroid support supplement. Um, it's actually by Dr. Weston Childs, and it is really, really, really good. It's basically like thyroid support that just really increases. And for me personally, I see a huge difference in that, where it basically has some different things to increase to help you with your T3 to T4 conversion, or your T4 to T3 conversion, that I think makes a big difference, especially if you have any kind of thyroid issues. For me, makes a huge difference.
Do you take that year round, Chantel, or just when you're in a weight loss phase?
I take it year round. As many days as every once in a while I might like. It's basically called T3 conversion booster is what it's called. And for me, and I think for a lot of people, they're not getting enough selenium in their diet. And so it has like I have a friend who's a thyroid doctor, and she says that you need at least 200 micrograms of selenium. That's a really big thing that you need. And there's some like vitamin A in it, vitamin D3, and also iodine in there that just really helps my thyroid function. And I can tell when I don't take that, I feel like I'm cold, so like, I know, like, I'll kind of be like, oh my gosh, it's freezing. Does anyone else think it's freezing in here? And everyone's like, no, it's hot. I'm like, oh gosh, where's my T3 support?
Mm. Yeah, it sounds like a
So
really
it
good
makes,
supplement.
yeah.
Even the ingredient list sounds really high quality and everything that supports thyroid function if taken individually. Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely. Well, great. Well, what else do people come to you a lot with? Like, kind of the biggest thing where you just feel like you're a broken record, where they're kind of coming to you. What would be the top questions that people ask you all the time?
Emotional eating is a big one. I work with a
Mm,
lot of people who struggle with emotional eating around food. And again, there's so many, that's such a layered area to go into. But normally people say, I can't stop emotional eating. Or, I keep binging on food at the weekends, or I'm really good Monday to Friday. And then I just binge all weekend and it undoes all my progress from the week. They're kind of the main topics and trends that I get most often. When it comes to emotional eating, I just get people to do a standard check-in, which is really useful. The difference between physical hunger and emotional hunger, they're two different things. So your physical hunger cues, one is that it's very slow and gradual and it's below the neck, normally in your stomach. And an emotional hunger cue is normally above the neck and it's very quick and rapid. So if you're feeling hungry through the day, especially when you're starting intermittent fasting initially, which can be tricky depending on your starting point, because that food restricted and time restricted eating window can be very difficult initially. You want to check in with that. Well, am I actually physically hungry? I.e., was that hunger slow and gradual and in my stomach? And you just need to ride the wave, because this intermittent fasting and hunger is like a wave. It passes over if you let it. And that's how you get into a protocol of 4-hour window fasts, or 4-hour eating windows, 6-hour eating windows, 8-hour eating windows, etc. And then if it's above and it's ahead rush where you're very sudden and you're like, oh, I'm dying for some ice cream or some cookies or some chips, that's normally emotional hunger. So that check-in sometimes works as a bit of a stopgate to get people to check in and be a bit more mindful with what's actually going on in their body. That, right, you had a stressful situation or a fight with a partner, or your boss yelled at you, or you had a stressful day, and now you're craving those foods because you're having an emotional response, not a physical hunger response. And I think that's a very useful check-in, especially for those at the early stage of an intermittent fasting journey, because that could be the hardest time to implement it. And people confuse those two things. And that's something I talk about a lot.
mm. So, what would you say, kind of like the second that someone goes, oh my gosh, I'm so stressed, this is happening, and they want to run for food? Do you have kind of a list of go-tos that they can do instead that would be a positive thing to kind of train their body? Hey, I'm stressed right now. The very first thing I'm going to do is go for a walk or whatever that is.
Yeah, pattern interrupt is really important when it comes to breaking that negative cycle of I feel stressed, I'm going to turn to food. Firstly, awareness. That's the first step towards any change. So you have to bring awareness and know that it's happening. For 8 out of 10 people, they've eaten the food and they didn't realize that they were stressed and that was their response. I think if you're able to identify, oh my God, I'm stressed, now I'm craving that food, you're 80% along the way because you have the awareness. After that, then you're just looking to put in an alternative strategy in that window of time until your brain starts to rewire itself that, okay, I'm stressed, this is what I go to. Generally, you're trying to match it. So exercise is a great example of this, like going for physical movement. You mentioned a walk there. It's probably not by accident that you're getting a little bit of an endorphin high with certain foods, especially sugary, salty, carb-laden foods are going to feel, you're going to feel really good after, and then you're going to feel really bad 10 minutes, 20 minutes after completely. But while you're eating it, you're going to feel better. Exercise gives you that endorphin release as well. And even going for a walk and movement. So replacing the stress response, you get a stress, there's a trigger, you have a stress response, you turn to food. You're trying to break that cycle with the food. So going for a walk, going and doing, a workout, going for a run, or even just listening to music, listening to a positive podcast like this, educating yourself, removing yourself from the physical environment. Like if you're having a nervous system response or a nervous system dysregulation because you've walked into the kitchen and that's why you're feeling the stress because the food is all there, maybe you just need to go into another room in your house and you have another room that you go to every time you have that response. And then when you're stressed, you now go to your meditation room or your bedroom or the living room that's away from the kitchen. So you're looking to put a system in place so that you're not falling off track just because you have a bad habit and you keep falling into it. Again, different things will work for different people. So you want to experiment with it. But once you find something that works for you, double down and just keep using that every time you have that response.
Guys, I just want to interrupt for just a second, and I want you to hear Paul Saladino talk about why liver is so important. And if you don't like liver, we have another option for you.
Your ancestors were eating liver. And the reason that this sort of wisdom has been passed down is because liver is very nutritious. It's basically nature's multivitamin. If you look at the nutrients in meat, they're great. You've got zinc, you got B6, you got B12, you got some K2. But if you look at liver, it really complements what's in muscle meat. And there are many unique nutrients found in organs, specifically liver as a powerhouse of these, that are difficult to obtain outside of liver. Like meat and organs are like peanut butter and jelly. They just go together. They're supposed to be eaten together. The easiest way to eat liver is just to do it raw. If you don't want to eat liver raw, you can cook it. But the reason that I like to do it raw is because there are unique nutrients in liver that are probably somewhat degraded when you cook the liver.
This really is like the most nutrient-rich supplements that you can find, and they are amazing. I have tried them. I absolutely love them. So just go to heartandsoil.co, use the coupon code, and save you some money there. Yeah, I love what you said about interrupting the pattern because that is really, really so important. And I think the power of breathing to interrupt emotional eating is so important. Like one of the things I don't do is I don't breathe well. And so I have to consciously make that decision when at any time I'm stressed, if you're an emotional eater or a stress eater or someone who overeats on autopilot, then your first instinct is always going to be food. And you have to interrupt that pattern. And the easiest thing you can do right then is if you can train yourself to learn how to breathe. If you think about, I smoked cigarettes for probably 2 to 3 years when I was like between the age of like 18 till or like 17 till about like the 20, something like that. I smoked. And one of the things it was like, think about it. You're just inhaling and then you're exhaling and it relieves that stress. And I obviously haven't smoked since then, but that whole idea, I think we forget how easy it is. Like you're there and you can literally start taking in breaths and breathing out. That is the quickest and easiest thing you can do, because now you're interrupting that pattern and saying, okay, I'm going to stop right now and realize that I'm not physically hungry for food right now. I'm physically, I'm just stressed. Would you agree?
100%. And I'm going to add on that because you've given me a beautiful entry point to that, Chantel, because sometimes people need to understand why breathing is such an effective tool. If you think about a stress response and you're feeling stressed, what normally happens to people is you get a sympathetic nervous system response. So you've parasympathetic, you're rested, you're just, your sympathetic is your fight or flight. When you get a stress response and you get a craving for food, your body's got into a mild fight or flight, whatever that trigger was, fight with a loved one, fight with a boss. It's evolutionary hardwired from 10,000 years ago when you saw a cheetah in the savannah and you were going to become its dinner. We have the same stress response now. But what happens when you breathe is you switch from sympathetic nervous system into parasympathetic nervous system, because 10,000 years ago, if a cheetah came, your heart rate got up, you got very heady, and you got all the blood into your body, into your head, and you were able to move and go. In 2024 and beyond, if you're able to take a deep breath, it slows and calms your central nervous system. It self-regulates your nervous system and switches it back into its parasympathetic state by breathing. Because if you're hardwired from that 10,000 years, that you wouldn't be able, if you were actually in danger now, you wouldn't be able to take those deep breaths. But so by taking the deep breaths and going, or your box breathing, 4 seconds in, 4 second hold, 4 second out, box breathing, you're calming down that parasympathetic nervous system, or calming down that nervous system and putting it into a parasympathetic state. And it's telling your body you're not in danger, you're fine. And sometimes that can take you out of your head and it can remove the stress response. So that's a really useful tool, because you can breathe anywhere at any time. And sometimes if you get that response, try exactly like Chantel said, use the breathing in that moment, and you can start to switch out of that sympathetic fight or flight state into that rest or digest parasympathetic state. And then what you can completely alleviate in some cases, if it was a stress response, and your cravings can go away, and that emotional eating pattern can get completely rewired.
And one of my biggest pet peeves is I hate, and it's funny because I think we had someone on the podcast not too long ago, and I stopped her right there because she was like, well, if you are stressed, you can go eat carrots. And I was like, I'm going to stop you right there. I said, I think that's the worst thing that you can do, because what you're still doing is you're still training your body. When I'm stressed, I'm going to eat something, and you have to get rid of that altogether. You can't eat carrots, because if you're still training to go, I'm stressed, I'm eating carrots, the next minute you're going to be like, screw it, I'm stressed, I'm going to eat brownies. The whole idea is you don't ever want to go to food when you're eating for emotional reasons. And sometimes you need to enlist support, right? Like you need to get a coach, you need to get someone there, because sometimes you need to vent or be around people who make you feel really good. And we all have that person we turn to when stuff hits the fan. Instead of turning to food, consider turning to a friend or a significant other for support. And to me, running to carrots or anything healthy, that has to be cut. Like you have to make the decision to say, I'm never going to eat food, any kind of food, if I'm stressed. And that is what will help end the emotional eating. Do you agree?
Oh, yes, I could. You're preaching from the same hymn sheet, that what happens with carrots or healthier food, quote unquote, healthier food, is it becomes a gateway to another food, because you're still using food as the coping mechanism during a stressful state. And what you're trying to do is completely rewire the neuroplasticity in your brain, that you're not making these associations with food and stress, that you're using alternative things like calling a friend or talking to your significant other, or going and doing a workout, going for a run, listening to something positive online, or listening to music to kind of regulate yourself again, or breathing. They're going to be much more effective tools over the short, medium, and long term. So yeah, I couldn't agree more.
You know, the thing about, I'll give you the example of what carrots are. Okay. This is how idiotic this is. It literally, it would be like someone who's an alcoholic, and you would say, okay, well, instead of drinking straight vodka, go ahead and drink low alcohol cocktails like a white wine spritzer, or having, a low proof daiquiri, or something that had lower levels of alcohol. There's nobody in AA who would ever say to you, okay, go ahead and just drink the lower, least alcoholic beer, or the least alcoholic, spritzer or whatever. Would any Alcohol Anonymous tell you that? It's like, no, you have to train your body that when you're stressed, you don't run to the alcohol. Same thing. If food is your vice, then train your body not to go to the carrots and the celery sticks.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. Like, I think you said it beautifully earlier that when you're using food to deal with an emotional issue, that's the problem. Because, like, I'm a big believer in food freedom. Enjoy your food, everything in moderation. Go out for meals with your family and loved ones and have all that. Like, have that balance. But there's no scenario where dealing with emotional eating and stress eating with food is helpful. You're trying to completely disconnect those associations, like you said. And I think that analogy is really going to stick, or that metaphor will really stick with alcohol, because I think it's similar in this scenario, if not identical. You don't want to use food as a coping mechanism, whether it's quote unquote healthy or not, because you're just using another food to deal with the stressful situation. And in a lot of cases, I would imagine similar to alcohol, it can become a gateway into something more.
Yes. And I think we're on the same page of just the moderation. Like, obviously, we all want to eat healthy. We want to fuel our bodies with really good food, but we also don't want to deprive ourselves to the point where that leads to a binge. So talk about that food moderation that you believe in, and kind of it can help people not go onto these deprivation type scales.
That is probably where I spend the most time working with clients, is on that binge restrict cycle that regularly is accompanied by a lot of guilt and shame around food. And the binge restrict cycle is a very tricky one to unpack, because it shows up in different ways for people. Binge restrict, for one, is, restricting all day and then binging at nighttime. For somebody else, it's restricting all week and binging at the weekend. For someone else, it's binging or restricting all month and then binging all week because they hit a target and they went out for a night out for a couple of drinks, and then the floodgates opened and then they couldn't stop eating and drinking everything in sight. I think identifying it, similar to earlier, awareness is the first step. Knowing that you have a bad, an unsupportive pattern with your eating is the first step. After that, it's looking for that moderation. So there's two approaches that tend to be useful here. One is, is your body actually getting everything it needs? Because if you're nutrient deficient, i.e., you're just not eating good food, you're going to really struggle with binge and restrict, because your body is craving those micronutrients, the fiber in the food, the protein to repair from workouts if you're training. And if you're not giving it what it needs, you're going to struggle with cravings. You're going to struggle with binge restricting. The second is the behavioral patterns around the food, that you have a negative food relationship. You've gone through some miseducation in your life, that you've separated foods into good and bad categories, and that's unsupportive for you right now. And sometimes those categories are correct, sometimes they're not correct, sometimes it's just miseducation. But you need to ask, do I need professional help with this? Because there's coaches out there, brilliant coaches, nutritionists, other coaches that can potentially support you and serve you with this, that might be able to help break that cycle. But if you are constantly repeating it, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. If you constantly repeat that cycle, you probably need professional help to break it, and healing that food relationship with a little bit of education around, okay, this food is actually quite supportive for my goal. This nutrient dense. This food is what I call soul food. Like, I'm a chocolate person. I don't have a sweet tooth. I have sweet teeth. I love chocolate. I love ice cream, but they're soul foods. Like, they're not nutrient dense. They're very calorie dense, but they feel good for my soul. I don't eat a whole tub and I don't eat 10 bars, but I factor in a little bit every day because I absolutely love them. And moderation and that balance is what you're looking to achieve over time. That binge restrict cycle, and then the shame and guilt that comes with it, and those underpinning emotions of, oh my God, I can't believe I fell off plan again, or the guilt around, well, I said I was going to do it and I didn't stick to it. They're horrible things that people can self-identify with, and makes it very difficult to break that cycle. So I would ask people, if they're struggling and they've been doing this pattern for months or years, you might need professional help. If you've just fallen off the bandwagon and you've been doing this for the last few weeks, then even just bringing the awareness around it's probably going to be enough to rewire it and train it in a different way.
Did you know that you can get all 4 of the books that I wrote, Waste Away, Fasting to Freedom, One Meal into Tasting, and Freedom from Food? You can buy all 4 books and get the ebook for free. Go right now to chantelrayway.com, or you can go to Amazon. Also, I just wrote a brand new book called How to Delegate Everything But Sex. If you are stressed out and are tired of doing everything on your own, go check out Delegate Everything But Sex. And there's all kinds of freebies on the site. Yeah, I couldn't agree more, because if you are allowing yourselves to eat certain foods that you've now said this is off limits, like if you can say, there's no food off limits, I'm going to eat clean foods and healthy foods, but if I want a little bit of this or a little bit of that, because sometimes the more you say you can't have something, the more you think about it and you crave it. If you let yourself just have 1 or 2 little bits of something, you're more likely to just move on. And you might think you may go overboard if you just let yourself have a little bit. But if you can trust yourself, you will start coming up with a balance on that and being able to see, like, there's people who come to my house, and I have I'm very big on like organic stuff, but I'll have a little bit of like organic junk food at this snack table. And, people are like, I can't believe you have all this food here and you never, like, it seems like you don't ever eat it. And it's like, if I want it, I can have it. I just am choosing not to eat that. But if like there's times where I might have it, I might have 1 or 2 and I can walk away from it. Having that kind of mentality to me is true freedom. It really is. Like if I can have 2 bites of something, I've eaten it. I had that taste. I don't need to eat the whole thing. When you can get yourself to that place, to me, that is truly freedom. Do you agree?
I agree. It's a beautiful place to be, especially if you've historically not had the best relationship with food. That food freedom makes life feel a bit more colorful. It makes you feel and increases your self-trust in most areas, not just with food. And I think there's so much crossover for direct happiness and peace that comes from getting that food freedom. And it can be built if it's not something that you currently have. Again, as you mentioned, Chantel, based on your history and where you're at now, that starting point to where you are now is a beautiful influence and inspiration for people that don't feel bad because you're not where you want to be now, because you can get there. It's just going to take some time, maybe some education, maybe some professional help, or maybe just some testing and experimentation on your side, but you can get there.
Yeah. Well, it seems like me and you are just so aligned. We're just like right there, aren't we, together? Well, this has been amazing. Tell listeners where they can find you and where they can follow you.
Thanks so much, Chantel. I really enjoyed this. It was a great conversation. BrianKeaneFitness.com is the website. I'm Brian Keane Fitness on social media. The Brian Keane Podcast is the podcast, and all my books are on Amazon. So whatever way you like to consume, listening, watching videos, reading, I try and put out loads of information as much as I can that help people on their journey with weight loss, with body composition, getting their body fat down, and doing it the right way so they can be happier in themselves over the long term.
I love that. Well, this has been amazing. You guys stay tuned. We've got another episode coming up in just a few. Bye-bye for now.